Imagine you are standing at the edge of the greatest secret the ancient world ever kept. The desert stretches endlessly before you. The year is 1922. The sun hammers the sand of Egypt's Valley of the Kings. And then, a boy trips over a stone. That stumble changed history. On November 4th, 1922, a water boy working on British archaeologist Howard Carter's excavation site in Luxor stumbled on what turned out to be the top of a staircase, cut deep into the bedrock, sealed and untouched for over 3,000 years. Carter ordered the steps cleared. What emerged from the dust was a plastered doorway stamped with a royal cartouche. Tutankhamun, the boy king, lost to time, found again. Carter was so shaken, so determined to protect what lay beyond that door, that he filled the staircase back in and sent a telegram to his financial backer, George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, waiting in England. Come at once. Extraordinary discovery made. Carnarvon arrived 2 weeks later, and on November 26, 1922, the two men stood before a sealed stone wall in an underground corridor. Carter made a small breach in the upper left corner. He pushed a candle through into the darkness. Carnarvon, breathless, asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter replied, "Yes, wonderful things." What they saw was the treasure of a lost king. Gold thrones, alabaster vases, gilded couches, painted walls glowing in the candlelight. Tutankhamun, who had ruled ancient Egypt around 1333 BC at only 9 years old and died at approximately 18, had been sleeping undisturbed for more than 3 millennia. It was the greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century, and within 5 months, the man standing beside Howard Carter that day, the Earl of Carnarvon, was dead. The world went into a frenzy. Lord Carnarvon's death came on April 5th, 1923. A mosquito bite on his cheek became infected after he nicked it while shaving. In an era before penicillin, still years away from being discovered, the wound turned septic and blood poisoning followed. He was 56 years old. Tragic, yes. Mysterious. The newspaper screamed that it was something far worse. 2 weeks before Carnarvon died, a novelist named Marie Corelli had written a piece in New York World magazine warning that dire punishment would find anyone who broke into the Pharaoh's tomb. Carnarvon's death seemed to land right on cue. And then came the details that the press couldn't resist. On the night Carnarvon breathed his last in Cairo, the entire city reportedly went dark. A complete power outage. Back in England, his son claimed that Carnarvon's beloved dog let out a long, mournful howl, and then dropped dead. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes and a committed believer in the supernatural, announced publicly that the Earl had been killed by elementals, not souls, not spirits, created by Tutankhamun's priests to guard the royal tomb. The world was hooked. More deaths followed. George J. Gould, a wealthy American railroad executive who had visited the tomb, died of a fever in May 1923. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, the radiologist who X-rayed Tutankhamun's mummy, died in January 1924 during surgery. Arthur Mace, a member of Carter's excavation team, died in 1928 of pleurisy. Howard Carter's own secretary, Richard Bethel, was found smothered in his bed at a private club in London in 1929. Bethel's father threw himself from a building the following year, and British archaeologist Hugh Evelyn White, who had visited the tomb, died by suicide in 1924, allegedly leaving a note written in his own blood, reading, "I have succumbed to a curse which forces me to disappear." The pattern seemed undeniable. The mummy's curse was real. Except it wasn't. Let's stop the story right here, because this is where legend and reality split apart. Start with the most glaring fact. Howard Carter, the man who discovered the tomb, broke through the sealed walls, physically removed the mummy of Tutankhamun from his sarcophagus, and spent years inside those chambers. Lived for another 17 years. He died in March 1939 of Hodgkin's disease at the age of 64. Not cursed, not struck down. He was the one person the curse should have hunted above all others, and he outlasted nearly everyone around him. The New York Times, in his obituary, called Carter's long life the best refutation of the curse. Carter himself dismissed the entire idea, calling it Tommy rot. And Carter was not alone in his survival. Sergeant Richard Adamson, a member of Carter's team who physically guarded the burial chamber around the clock for 7 consecutive years, and was arguably the European most continuously exposed to Tutankhamun's remains, lived for another 60 years, dying in 1982. Lady Evelyn Herbert, Lord Carnarvon's own daughter, and one of the very first people to enter the tomb in November 1922, lived until 1980, 57 more years. A statistical study found that of the 58 people present at the tomb's opening and the unsealing of the sarcophagus, only 8 died within the following 12 years. The rest lived on. The group's average age at death exceeded 73, actually beating the actuarial tables for people of their time and social class by about a year. As skeptic and researcher James Randi noted with dry precision, if this is a curse, it's a beneficial one. So what really killed Lord Carnarvon? A mosquito bite and the absence of modern antibiotics. What killed George J. Gould? A fever contracted while traveling through Egypt, a risk every tourist took in those days. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed had skin cancer before he ever approached Tutankhamun's mummy. Arthur Mace had suffered from pleurisy for years. Richard Bethel's death remains genuinely murky, but no verified connection to the tomb was ever established. As medical researchers have pointed out, the deaths that followed the excavation were caused by infections, pre-existing illnesses, accidents, and surgical complications, the ordinary tragedies of human life in the early 20th century. Scientists did eventually propose one intriguing biological theory: that ancient tombs sealed for thousands of years can harbor colonies of mold, particularly a fungus called Aspergillus flavus, capable of causing serious respiratory infections in people who breathe in its spores upon entry. It is possible that some deaths may have been connected to such biological contaminants. But even this theory has been disputed and remains unproven in Carnarvon's case specifically. And here is the detail that quietly unravels the whole mythology. No curse was ever actually found inside Tutankhamun's tomb. None. Archaeologists searched thoroughly. Actual tomb curses do exist in ancient Egypt. A handful of Old Kingdom tombs carry inscriptions warning priests to protect the burial site. But Egyptologist Donald B. Redford, surveying all of the Tutankhamun curse evidence, dismissed it plainly as unadulterated claptrap. The legend was built on a foundation of nothing. What did exist was a global press desperate for a story. The 1920s were the golden age of tabloid journalism, and a boy king's tomb full of gold was already the greatest story of the decade. Add a dead earl, a power outage, a howling dog, and a Sherlock Holmes author talking about ancient elementals, and you have something irresistible. The newspapers ran with it, the public devoured it, and a myth was born, not in the hieroglyphs of a pharaoh's tomb, but in the printing presses of London and New York. Howard Carter spent the rest of his life quietly insisting the curse was nonsense, working his excavation with patience and scholarship, watching the legend swirl around him while he just kept doing the work. A solitary man who gave the world one of its greatest discoveries and received in return mostly grief and superstition. 3,000 years ago, a teenage boy was buried in the dark beneath the Egyptian desert. 3,000 years later, we found him. And instead of sitting with the extraordinary miracle of that, we invented a monster to explain away our discomfort with death. The only real curse of Tutankhamun is that we have never been very good at telling the difference between a story and the truth.